Today on CityCast DC, Shane Lamond was the head of intelligence for the DC police until he was indicted on charges that he helped the Proud Boys before January 6th. He was finally convicted last month, and the Washington Post's Tom Jackman watched the case unfold. He's here to tell us about Lamond and to talk about what the trial says about extremism and law enforcement. Today is Monday, January 6th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Mike.
All right, so for people who are not familiar, who haven't been following the case, who is Shane Lamond? What was he accused of doing?
Well, he was until 2023. He was lieutenant in the intelligence unit of the MPD, the Washington, D.C. Police Department. And his job is to gather intelligence about criminals, crime, try to help figure things out before they happen or figure out what happened afterwards. It's typically regarded in police departments as sort of a select unit that is out there, gathering intel. They're in a secret location. They're just occasionally sharing info as they see fit. He is one of many people charged with gathering information about good guys, bad guys, and in between to try to stop crime or solve crime. And that's what he was trying to do when he established contact with the Proud Boys. Starting in 2019, he made contact with Enrique Tarrio, the head of the Proud Boys, and the Proud Boys would come to town from time to time and wear their black and gold get-ups and march around and chant and do things. And they had a couple of those gatherings in D.C. after the 2020 election. There was one in November of 2020 and one in December of 2020. And so Lieutenant Lamond is in touch with these guys to try to figure out where they're going to be, what they're going to do, how many of them are there going to be, what are their plans. And that makes sense, all right? That's a good thing to try to, elicit intelligence from the targets. So he is in touch with Tarrio, and when they're in town in December, while they're marching around town at, I want to say 11th and E, they pull a banner, a Black Lives banner off of a church downtown, and in the middle of the street set it on fire. And there's video of it. It's a little hard to figure out who's who in the video. But the burning of the Black Lives Matter banner became a criminal investigation for the DC police. And Lieutenant Lamond in December of 2020 is having some conversations with Tarrio, and he even, 3 days after the banner burning, meets Tarrio at the Dubliner, the Irish bar near Union Station. So you want to get together for beers? And they do. Both Tarrio and Lamond claim that in that meeting, they say, we didn't talk about whether or not I burned the banner, whether Tarrio burned the banner. But then soon after that, Tarrio decided to go public and post on his social media, I burned the banner, come and get me. At which point, the police turn to Lamond and say, did Tarrio say anything to you about burning the banner when you guys were meeting at the Dubliner? Lamond responds with an expletive. Not sure how family friendly we are here, so I'll just go with that. And goes back to Tarrio and says, did you admit burning the banner? And Tarrio says, well, yes, I even put it on social media. So Lamond reports that back. There is some great skepticism over the claim by Lamond. Well, Tarrio didn't tell me. We were just sitting there having friendly drinks at the Dubliner. He didn't mention to me that he burned that banner. They then begin a criminal investigation of Tarrio, and Lamond, as captured in a number of text messages between them, keeps Tarrio updated on what's happening in the investigation into Tarrio. That's not a thing police typically do.
They say he told Tarrio to auto-delete his texts, and they say that Lamond lied to the investigators, which is to say the other part of the police department.
Lamond suggested to Tarrio, we need to go to Telegram where everything's encrypted, and then even beyond that, we need to set messages to auto-delete. And so there are key messages which aren't seen because they were automatically deleted. Others were seen, and others were preserved. So their conversation in late December of 2020 into early January of 2021 they're talking, and Lamond, the police lieutenant, is updating the subject of the investigation on the investigation and telling him, they've showed me a photo of you to identify you in this. And then the big key is whether or not Lamond then told Tario there's a warrant for your arrest. That was a specific charge, was alerting him to the warrant. And Lamond got on the witness stand and said, I did not alert him. Tario said the same thing. He didn't alert me. But minutes after, there is some sort of exchange between them that was auto-deleted. Tario then sends messages to his people saying, there's a warrant out for my arrest in D.C. And so the judge who heard this case didn't believe either Tario or Lamond, and did believe that Lamond alerted Tario to the fact that he was facing arrest when he arrived here.
So this contact led to his conviction last month.
So Lamond was found guilty of obstruction of justice and also making 3 false statements in an interview with the U.S. Attorney's Office when they were asking him about his involvement.
So he is scheduled to be sentenced on April 3rd. What kind of sentence is he facing?
Well, there's maximums of 20 years. There's a lot of disagreement. We had thought in reading the law that there's a mandatory 3-year minimum for obstruction of justice for alerting Tario to the warrant. Lamond's lawyers say that's not applicable. We don't really know the answer. The maximum sentence is not, a possibility here. Nobody's going to give him 20 years. But whether or not he's facing a minimum of 3 years is the big issue that's going to come up in the next few months before the sentencing.
So this is what was so interesting about the case that you covered is, when he was first indicted, the indictment was full of these messages that he had exchanged with Tario, a police lieutenant, a senior official in the MPD, and he's telling him, I can't say it officially, but I totally support you guys. The day after Biden's election, he's saying, well, that was a travesty. He's saying all this sort of right-wingy stuff. And that was actually not at issue in the case. I mean, what the accusations were much more narrow, which is that he lied to investigators and he tipped Tario off. He was not accused of being, a turncoat. He was accused of being somebody who didn't tell the truth to his bosses.
Correct. That's right. That's a good way to put it, is that, in the end, they came to him afterwards and said, did you tell him this? He said, no. Did you say this? He said, no. And they had proof of these things. So there was 3 different counts that he was convicted of lying to the police about.
And Lamond's defense was, look, I was an intel officer. My job was not to make cases. My job was to find out stuff from people. And if that meant, buttering them up by letting them think I'm on their side, that was what I was just doing what I was supposed to do. But the judge didn't buy it, even though, quite unusually for a case like this, Lamond himself, that is to say the defendant, took the stand.
Yeah, the judge did not buy it. And there is a fine line to walk. You do want to get information out of them. But a key example of how it wasn't really a both ways exchange of information was that Lamond asked Tario, are you guys coming to Jan 6th? And Tario said, yeah, but there won't be very many of us. It'll just be a small group. And that was a lie. There were hundreds of them. And so the judge said, her quote was, whatever the relationship had been before, the defendant, Lamond, was not using Tario as a source. It was the other way around. He knew then and he knows now that it was wrong. So that was what the judge said after hearing from Lamond and Tario, who she said was a terrible, unbelievable witness.
So Lamond had chose to not have a jury trial. He wanted to just have it before the bench. Why did he choose that?
We think it's because, and they've said some things to this effect, that they just felt like a jury would be less sympathetic to a cop in these days where police feel embattled because of all the things that police have done. George Floyd being A1 on the list in terms of they feel like the public is not on their side. And so why not take a shot with a judge who sees what the police do every day in their courtroom and maybe more sympathetic or favorable to the situation that Lamond was in. But this judge analyzed it differently.
So the city's sort of officialdom expressed satisfaction about the results of this trial. I have written about this a little bit in the last year, and I'm curious what you think. One of the things that struck me as kind of shocking about this, but I was surprised at how little sort of ambient shock there was, that Lamond is accused of being a sympathizer with white supremacists. That wasn't the issue in the trial, but it was certainly something that came out in the indictment. This has been since January 6th, and perhaps before, has been an issue at MPD. Michael Fanone, the MPD officer who was hurt at the Capitol, wrote in his autobiography that the DC Police Department and the Union was riddled with insurrectionist sympathizers. And he personally felt unsafe around his colleagues. I'm curious if anything came out in the trial or in the aftermath of it that suggests the brass is concerned about this, taking it seriously, and planning to do anything different.
They were very quiet. We didn't hear from the brass at all, and we tried. And they have not weighed in on, how widespread are these beliefs? And Torrio said, I don't want to say this publicly, but I support you guys in what you believe. Was he just buttering them up so that they would talk to him? Or did he really believe that? When he was on the witness stand, he said, I'm not a Proud Boy sympathizer, and I don't appreciate these articles saying that I am. Well, his own words are his own words, and he said those things in messages to Torrio. So your question is, how widespread is that in the department? We didn't get a good sense of that in the trial. We certainly didn't hear from MPD higher ups about it.
Do we know if he was the only one in that intel unit who was in touch with Tario or with others in the kind of right-wing universe?
He was the only one in that intel unit because he was telling his supervisors, I'm in touch with Tario. And then he told his supervisors, I'm going to the Dubliner with this guy. One of whom said, is that a good idea? And he said, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. So he told his people that he was in touch. And then whenever they wanted to know something, the higher ups, the assistant chiefs, would go to him and say, can you ask Tario what's happening with such and such? And he would. And so he was known in his silo to have this contact, but there was no indication that anybody else in the department did. Now, Tario tried to claim on the witness stand that he had another source in the department and it wasn't Lamond. And the judge did not buy that at all. I'm not sure if I do either. There weren't that many people that would have even known that there was a warrant out for him. So the judge didn't buy that at all.
There have been previous cases, both of insurrectionists, white supremacists, and of accused cops, where the courtroom itself has drawn a lot of sort of sympathetic people from the far right community or from like the FOP and the people who believe that cops are getting a bum rap. Lamond has not, to my knowledge, been turned into an icon for either of these groups. That might have been useful during the trial. It might not have been a great idea for having them show up at the trial, but I don't get the sense that the FOP has rallied around him in a unique way.
They have not. We asked them about that, and I sort of thought that MPD would have folks there just keeping an eye on this, and they did not, as far as we could tell. And there weren't that many people in the courtroom. So I think that because he wasn't held up as, this guy is getting wrongly, accused, or this is a good cop who's being, falsely slandered, we didn't really encounter that at all. It was really his attorneys who had to sort of do the talking for him. And they did as much as they could.
So there was new reporting also late last year from you and from your colleagues at the Post about how the FBI did or didn't collect and disseminate intel ahead of January 6th. What did you guys find? Because I think it's sort of tangentially related to the issues of the Lamond trial.
Well, a couple things. They had info. Sometimes they didn't exactly share it with each other. And also, they felt like, that's not really our area. We don't guard the Capitol. There's two police departments, the Capitol Police and the MPD. They have that. That's not our area, but we'll support them. That was the FBI's take. And then they were getting information from people around the country. There's a lot of people here in Washington State or Texas that are getting ready to march on Jan 6th, and they were hearing things, and they would sometimes share them amongst themselves, but not necessarily with. There was a couple that just should have gone to DC and didn't. And then there was the problem that earlier, like in December of 2020, people from the field offices were sending in everything. All right, Bob Smith may be going to Washington on Jan 6th, and the Washington field office is like, what does that tell us? That doesn't tell us anything. Stop sending us everything you know. As a result, the bureaus in the field did stop sending a lot of things, including things that they should have sent, because they'd been told in late December, don't send us so much. And so when they got stuff in early January, they didn't share with DC. And then what would the DC office have done with it? Would they have shared it with MPD and with U.S. Capitol Police? I mean, those were the two agencies, and the Park Police, that really were trying to keep a lid on all of this. And all those agencies had indications. But the FBI felt like, we'll share it when we can.
So how has the FBI responded to your reporting? And do you have any sense that there will be sort of systemic changes as a result of this?
I didn't know this was the comedy hour. I have no sense that any systemic changes will be. Well, they talked about we need to be better about sharing information among each other and, red flagging things that are important. So I think there will be some improvement internally with their communications. There's been, since time immemorial, problems where between the feds and the locals. That's just always been a thing where the feds have their info gathering system, their silo, and then local police have theirs. In some cities, they don't like each other. They not only don't share information, they happily don't share information. Other cities here, they get along much better, and they usually do share information. It just didn't make it to the DC field office in some cases here. But we know that, the Capitol Police had hints, the MPD had hints or tips about things that were coming and didn't act on them. So,
all right. And for anyone who doesn't want to act, having the sense that the intel officer on the other end of your internal call may be a compromised actor, that gives you an extra incentive to not act.
Correct.
So the big picture of January 6th in local Washington has been, these heroic police officers defended the Capitol with their bodies and were celebrated by some, but were kind of kicked to the curb by others. Both the Lamond case and your reporting on the intel snafus kind of complicates that a little bit. Not that they make anyone less heroic, but there's also a story of some sort of institutional and individual failures.
That's exactly right. And it could be, that could be interpolated further to what happened to the investigation of these things after Jan 6. The Justice Department did not exactly leap to the fray in terms of trying to figure out what the higher organization of this was. And that Justice Department and the FBI are being blamed for these Trump cases going away because they waited so long to get them started. There was resistance within the FBI to investigate Trump and his role in Jan 6 for a long time. We've reported that. And so that's just going to be an issue in that agency always, that there are people who sympathize with these folks. And so where do you go with that? I don't know. There are folks, Dan Goldman in Congress is trying to, go after extremists in the Department of Homeland Security, but it's a lot harder to do with the FBI.
So is Lamond going to appeal?
Undoubtedly. I'm not sure what, because it's harder to appeal a judge verdict because she's going to issue a written ruling on her verdict, explaining her rulings. And so, I'm sure we'll appeal, and it will be tough sledding.
Tom, thank you so much for being here.
It's good talking to you, Mike.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.